A very good afternoon to our guests, staff members, eminent speakers, most beloved audience. We are now moving to the valedictory session. The speaker for this session is none other than Mr. Raghu Ananthanarayanan. Raghu Ananthanarayanan is a postgraduate in engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is a leading consultant to several blue chip companies, Indian as well as multinational. He has devoted almost 2 decades to transforming the organizational culture of several leading organizations. He is one of the founders of Sumedhas, the Academy for Human Context. He is a visiting faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has taught at Institute of Rural Management, Anand, and Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He has studied yoga with Yogacharya Krishnamacharya and TKV Desikacharya. He has taught yoga at Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram for a decade and published a world renowned book on yoga. Sir's present focus is in organization design and change management. He has developed a unique methodology called Totally Aligned Organization that brings together his understanding of manufacturing systems, human processes, and yoga. He has published a book where he has elaborated upon the key ideas from yoga and process work that he has used in management context. Sir has worked with several NGOs helping them in personal development and organization development. He is also actively involved with reviving craft groups and theatre. He has been passionately attempting a convergence between Indian traditional wisdom and modernity. Sir, we are really grateful to have you among us. Without much further ado, I request you to enlighten us with your golden words.
Thank you, thank you. I'm very grateful for this invitation to speak at your valedictory. I also come here with a lot of respect for some of the speakers who have graced this event before me. One of the things that I'm very grateful for is to be able to speak in an institution which is named after Lokmanya Tilak. And it struck me that what we're talking about in terms of equity, in terms of sustainability, and several things like this were probably topics that were very close to Lokmanyaji's heart. Because not only was he a great freedom fighter, I'm sure you know that he's written a lot of books. He's taken his own ideas into the way to interpret the Bhagavad Gita and so on. And I think one of the most important statements that he made, which has got relevance to what we are talking about today, is when he said that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. It's been a very inspiring statement, and to many of us who've been working in various activist roles and working with people who've been, depressed by social processes and so on, this has been a very, very important source of meaning in our work. The way me and some of my friends who've been working in this area, I don't know if you've heard about Dr. Pradeep Prabhu and Dr. Suresh, who've done a lot of work in the tribal areas. Pradeep Prabhu was actually part of, I think he was the chairperson for rewriting the rights of tribal people and so on. So we've been working together for a long time, and one of the things that we discovered was Swabhiman is an extremely important element in all the development work we've done with depressed people. Let me just explain what this means. See, if a person does not have a sense of pride for oneself, and along with it, a sense of respect for another, equity becomes impossible. So just because we've enshrined the word equity in our constitution, it doesn't mean equity is going to happen. Yeah? And when a person does not see themselves as worthy in their own eyes, and this lack of self-worth is reinforced by other people whom they're with, obviously there is no equity, there is serious inequity, there is serious lack of symmetry in power equations. In so many ways, this word equity simply evaporates. Yeah? So what happens is that people who feel this way about themselves tend to accept serfdom, and they can only hope that their masters will treat them well. Okay. Now, while most of the initial understanding that we had of this whole idea came from working with people in the Dahanu area, the tribals of the Dahanu area, when we worked with more and more Indians across the board, we find that this lack of Swabhiman is very widespread in the Indian population. So what happens is, at various levels, there are various forms of inequity that come in. And for all the stuff that you people have been discussing for the last 2 days, I think Swabhiman, Swatantrata, Swarajya, these are very, very critical words. Okay, let me just illustrate this with some of the most poignant and shocking revelations that I've had personally in my work, and as a team, we've also experienced this. Many years, a few decades ago, I was working in the Dahanu area with Pradeep and Suresh, and after a series of interventions, one of the chaps, young people, got up and said something which is extremely sad to hear. Okay, he said that we thought we were equal to pigs because that's the way we are treated when we go into the town. And he said, you have helped us to remember that we are human beings, and also that we are the descendants of people who lived in harmony with all the beautiful animals and trees in this forest. And he actually used the word Swabhiman. He said, you have given us Swabhiman. We can now stand up, govern ourselves, and ask for rights which are due to us. And I've heard this kind of a realization of the self in several groups I've worked with. I've worked with groups that are, the so-called untouchables, Harijans, whatever you want to call them, Dalits. I've worked with senior people in organizations too. And for all of them, there is this underlying question of, how do I look at myself? Can I look at myself with real respect? And can I look at other people with respect? Right? Now, why is this such a critical thing? To understand the criticality of this, we have to go back a few hundred years and look at the historical process that has actually led to, I'll use strong words here, abasement and abuse of people who have great wisdom, people who've had polytheistic thought, people who've loved the earth, people who thought that every blade of grass is sacred, and things like this all across the world. So these are the people who, in their depths of their psyche, understand ecology and understand sustainability. And ecology and sustainability are not separate from respect for each other. Because if you look at their worldviews, which is something that most of us in India had till we got colonized, there is a deep respect for the sacred. And this respect for the sacred means that I hold every human being as sacred. I hold every animal as sacred. I hold every plant, everything as sacred. So if we look back into what the word dharma meant, Raja Dharma, you'll find that the word Raja Dharma is used to say that everything which is within the purview of that particular leader has to be sustained and has to be enlivened. And this can happen only with the kind of mindset that deeply, deeply respects everything around. So, how has this sense of inequity come into us is something we have to understand very, very clearly. Yeah, there are two books that have moved me very deeply. Okay, one book is a book called Bury My Heart in Wounded Knee. It's an old book. I wish all of you would read it if you're interested in this area. This was written by, I don't remember the author, but he was an American Indian, Native American, who's written about how the Americas were conquered. So he writes about how the people came into the East first, what were the kind of treaties made with the Native Americans who actually helped these people to survive and live, what happened to those treaties, how they were decimated, how they were attacked and thrown away from the place. And there are some tribes which were even told that they can't even use their own name for themselves. Right? And how this has happened time after time after time until the whole of the Americas was won. And if you read that book and look at some of the methods that were used, you would weep as I did. Yeah. The other book that's come out recently, which I recommend all of you must read, is a book called The Nutmegs Curse. And it's written by a person called Amitabha Ghosh. This also talks about a similar process, except that what Amitabha Ghosh has done is look at the whole world and how similar things have happened across every part of the globe. Right? And it's very important if you have to understand how the earth can revive itself, how human beings can live in harmony with the world, that you understand these processes very well, because many of our minds are deeply infected with the virus of colonialism as a way of thinking. Yeah. So some of the books I'll recommend to you, one of them is a lot of works by this lady called Linda Tuhiwai Smith. She's a Maori from New Zealand, and she writes about what happened to the Maori people. Right? There's another very important author called Frantz Fanon, who's written about what's happened in Africa and the kind of psyche that has got created. And closer home, we have Ashish Nandi, who's written an extremely good book called The Intimate Enemy. Now, it's very important to read these books because many of them tell us how these colonial processes, the colonizing mind, was initially resisted by a lot of people across the world who experienced the world as sacred, who experienced great equity amongst them, each other, and therefore held a knowledge about harmony, which is extremely critical if we have to go forward. Right? And this worldview has been replaced by a worldview which says that human dominion over the earth is some God-given right. And with this, a lot of things have been done. This idea has legitimized very, very violent takeovers of countries which were, by the European people, and then decimating people. There was even an idea of what is called the final solution that was put up, which in a sense said that only the superior races, which meant Western races, have a right to live, and all others will ultimately die or be replaced, or we can help the process by eliminating them. In any case, their lands and their knowledge can be exploited by us. Yeah. Now, this kind of thinking is at the root of the crisis that we are facing today. Okay, if I have to give you just one critical idea that completely represents this colonizing mind, it's the idea of GDP. Yeah, everybody has accepted that GDP is a measure of progress. But if you start looking at this measure carefully, you will understand that this is a measure of the violence that human beings do to the earth. It's a measure of the distance we have moved from an appreciation of the foundations of life and an appreciation of the sacred. Okay, there are small nations like Bhutan which have tried the idea of global, GDP, GH something, yeah, happiness index, yeah, which is a beautiful concept, but which is not a concept that helps economic feudalism. And unless measures like GDP, which represent a very, very deeply imbibed colonial idea of ruling the earth, are replaced by ideas like the happiness index, I don't think the processes that we are facing today can be reversed. Yeah, and this is a virus, and this virus is more deadly than COVID. Because every policy, every education policy, national policy, the idea of success that each of you carry are all imbued with some form of this idea of superiority, of success being me first, right? Success being measured by what you acquire. Yeah, these were not the ideas with which a large part of the earth grew. But these are ideas which have been completely imbibed by most people today. Okay, so this is very critical to the entire idea of the conference you've been running for the last couple of days. Yeah, let me just recount a small serious joke to you. There's a very interesting little piece that I read recently about this person who takes a cup of coffee in his hand and walks into the road, and somebody bumps into him, and this guy's beautiful snow white shirt gets spilled with coffee. So of course he gets very angry and starts fighting with this person who bumped into him. Yeah, there's a Zen master who's standing next to this chap, and he says, "Hey, why are you fighting with this guy? What gets spilt on your shirt depends on what you're holding in the cup. If you were holding pure water, your shirt will be white but wet. And if your cup is empty, you'll be perfectly fine." Okay, I'd like you people to look at this metaphor very carefully, because all of us are holding a mindset, which is the coffee in our cup, where the elements of inequity, elements which cannot sustain the earth, elements which are exploitative, are all mixed very deeply. Right? And the coffee we are holding has a lot of poison. And this is the coffee that makes us, not even the news in any part of a newspaper doesn't talk about what's happening to the Amazon forest today. And yet, what's happening to the Amazon forests is a continuation of the colonizing process. And it will have much more devastating effects on human beings perhaps than even the war that's going on now. And the war itself is just a continuity of several such wars that have happened, where you simply decide you need more territory, you decide that the other person is a dangerous guy. The only way to deal with it is to go and kill them. Yeah, and many of these violations that have been happening, including the way the Amazon forests are being killed off, are all done with impunity by people, the modern inheritors of colonial spoils. And many countries, including India, are just imitating these ideas as though these ideas are great ideas to be emulated. So if we have to really move into some of the things that your conference has been talking about, sustainability, equity in process, and things like that, you have to be very seriously interested in the meaning of equity, in the meaning of swabhiman, in the meaning of swatantrata, in the meaning of swadharma. And when you get very interested in these words, that is when you start looking at your cup and asking what is there in this cup. Yeah? And if you understand global processes today, you'll find that every currency note of every country has coffee spilt on it. And this coffee is the coffee of the blood of people who have been treated as though they're just resources, people who've been treated as equal to animals. So you'll find in the literature around the colonizing period serious discussions that say, do slaves have a soul? Are American Indians human beings or not? Okay? And this kind of an idea of other people who seem less educated than us is not the preserve of America, is not the preserve of Europe. Okay? You can see it all over the place. And it certainly exists in India. So this is the critical thing for many of you to look at. What am I carrying in my heart? What is there in my cup? Yeah? Am I reflecting this colonizing mind? If I am, I'm part of the problem. And it's only through examining this that I can become part of the solution. And one very critical aspect of the solution is that we really deeply understand what is sacred in us, what is sacred in the Gaia. And this is, you'll find this message in Tilak's translation of the Gita, Gandhiji's translation of the Gita. And I think a lot of people who fought for independence, especially in the early times, did carry some hope that this critical way in which people in India have always looked at themselves and other people will come back into daily practice, will come back and become the foundation of the country. Yeah, I'm a child of the 50s. I grew up with the hope of a great India, because that's what was taught to me in school. I'm 70 now. And I feel very sad that my generation has not lived up to this promise. We have not been able to cast off the mindsets of colonization. We have not created new education policies that really enable Swabhiman. I don't think India is really truly a country of Swatantrata and Swadharma. Yeah? And one critical thing for all of you to keep in mind is nature does not need human beings. The sacred does not need human beings. We need nature. We need the sacred. Without these two, we cannot enliven ourselves. And this is a simple central message. If it is carried by many of us, we can build a world that is sustainable. We can build a world with equity. But I must say, even as I talk to you, that my hope that it will happen in a large enough scale is a question mark. It is definitely happening in small pockets. There's a lot of stuff being written today about the importance of these things. Lots of stuff written about how we've come to be the way we are today. Okay, Amitabh Ghosh's book is not the only one. There are people like Paulo Freire and all of them who've written a lot of stuff on this. So if all of you are really keen on the theme of this conference, please take this seriously. Yeah, I thank you very much, and thank you very much for having invited me to offer whatever little I know. Yeah, if there is time, I wouldn't mind taking questions. I don't know how this is structured.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an illuminating and inspiring session. We will now move on to the question and answer session. I have one interesting question with me right now from the audience. They ask, how will I know which cup of coffee I am carrying?
Oh, that's very, very simple. Yeah. Yeah. If before you do something, you ask yourself the question, is what I'm doing going to enliven me, going to enliven people who are with me when I'm acting, and the world around me? And the answer is yes. You're carrying a beautiful cup, not of coffee, but of something enlivening. But if the answer to that question is, it only does good for me, it only answers the question, what's in it for me, and damn the rest, you're having dirty coffee.
Okay, that's it from the audience side, I guess, sir. Once again, from the entire Vidyapeet and the organizing committee, I thank you so much for coming and taking out your valuable time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.